You alright, mate? Just before we get into the show, just wanted to thank you for listening to the show. I wanted to remind you that there's a Patreon if you want to, chuck us a couple of quid as a little thank you, or, as a little bit of, make the show better. Here's £3. Well, it's up to you, There's also a Redbubble if you fancy some t-shirts in that. There's one with Mothman with his cock out. There's one with Mothman without his cock out. And there's a load of the taxidermy stuff now on t-shirts and quotes from other people that they've said to me online and that when they've been giving me abuse. I'll let you get into the show.
Right, guys, I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM, a show that, according to one security guard from a very well-known energy drink provider, changed their whole outlook on life. And honestly, as far as reviews go, I feel like I could do with a few more at a minute rather than the messages that I got saying, like, where do you even get your information from? Have you at some point succumbed to a head injury? And I like your dead animals and your ramblings and that on your live streams, but why are you so hung up on demonic interdimensional entities as soon as you're in that cupboard? So, this week, I'm going to be dead honest with you guys, this week is the third time I've recorded this show, because the first time I had audio dropouts for about half an hour, so I thought, fuck it, do it again. Then I had the whole recording itself corrupted because the battery fell out of the computer. So if I sound a little bit pissed off, it's not because I'm angry at the people who I'm going to be talking about. It's not because of that. It's just because this has took me a very, very long time now, and I've been in this cupboard in the dark for maybe two and a half hours, give or take. It's been a very fucking long morning. But this week, I thought what I'd do is I'd take a look at what is probably like quite a confusing event, and it definitely is. So it's set deep in the Russian mountains. It's Dyatlov Pass, obviously. I've spoken about it with Jimmy on Truth Seeking on the first episode, and I have been on an American podcast as well talking about it called the Cosmic Closet Podcast. But unfortunately, a catabonic wind came down their street and unfortunately destroyed their USB drive off the roof of the car, which is a shame because I thought it was a good episode. But it's weird how everything to do with this Dyatlov Pass fucks up, and maybe it's got something to do with the big they. Maybe it's got something to do with apparently when you look this stuff up in Russia, nothing at all appears, completely fabricated and made up. Now that makes me wonder, are the Russians trying to hide it and cover it up, or is Dyatlov Pass and the incident surrounding it, is that the same thing as what Russia's supposedly been doing with America and Europe by trying to make misinformation campaigns, fake news, fake myths, and push it to the masses through conspiracy theories and through podcasts? And America's gone, you know what, fuck it, we'll make one of our own, we'll set it in one of the mountains, and we'll kind of base it on Roswell. Who knows? I don't really know, but there has been some interesting developments in the case, so I thought that we'd go through the incident itself, a bit of what happened with it, and then we'd focus on the new stuff that's come out about it. So it's set back in a while ago, in the late 1950s, as late as you can go in the 1950s. Not like as late back, but as late as 1959, like the latest you can have of the 1950s. And it was all led by a bloke by the name of Igor Dyatlov, who decided that he'd lead an expedition into the Ural Mountains, and specifically, he wanted to take a team up the Kholat Skyle. And now, I'd normally not be one for watching that sort of thing, innit, but the thumbnail was quite deceiving, and I'd finished before any real sort of exploring had started, so I thought, I'll be alright in the eyes of the Lord and that. So, anyway, this journey, though, would end in a place that's incomprehensible to most people, other than maybe like Gary Busey, who allegedly once described the final destination of these people as a land without mirrors, which is a quote I enjoyed this week, because of course all the people that Igor did coax into his Ural passage ended up in heaven. Well, all but one of them, and we'll discuss him a little bit later, because he raises, the age-old question of, does it really count if they don't finish? So let's have a song, and we'll get into the story. This is the Alex Goose remix of Thuggin' by Freddie Gibbs and Madlib. Igor himself, the guy leading it all, he was a radio engineering student, so you've got to wonder if he was conducting some form of research using himself and the 9 other guys and girls as bait, or maybe like guinea pigs, depending on which story it is you believe. But this week, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and piece it all together to make one new story. So the mountain, as I said, was known as Collet Cycle. Cycle spelled Sykhal. That's back then anyway, but now it's more so now known as Dyatlov Pass. And these they didn't call it Dyatlov Pass then, because obviously Dyatlov himself was yet to march his newfound rambling partners to their death up a mountain. And the first few days of this expedition, things were going well. It seemed to be going, all above board and that, until one of the fellas took a bit sick and had to turn back. An already sickly man by the name of Yuri Udun, which makes this a proper sort of you-done-it story, I guess, because there's a part of me that believes that he may have actually been Dyatlov himself, after you find out what, like, some of the rumours and that around it all. And maybe he took the alias of this person as to not rouse suspicion when he came back, so he could pretend that he had died, even though he'd led these people to their death. And actually he came back and was able to live a long and fruitful life as a sick man who may or may not have actually been ill if it wasn't actually him who came back and it was actually Igor pretending to be Yuri Udin, and he was just pretending to be ill, like he's trying to get a card out the government or some sort of thing. But maybe they don't do that in Russia. I don't know what it would be the equivalent over there. I don't know if they have that sort of standardized sort of like DLA kind of thing, but I'm not too sure. And it's not, it could be through lack of evidence that I don't have the answer to that, or it could be a lack of me searching for the evidence. It's difficult to ascertain whether or not that they could have been the same person, innit? But like he lived to 75, innit, which is a good age. Like for a radio engineer, I imagine that's a reasonable age, because it's not exactly a dangerous job, is it? Maybe you'll get the odd headache and that, but. And it's a long time though, 75 years. Like, so let's say he was about 20 when he went there. 50 odd years is a long time to feel like you've cheated death by being ill, though, if you are actually Yuri Udin and Udin is who he says he was, and if he's not Igor. So if we're taking fact as fact, guys, I do think that 50 odd years he's going to be feeling quite guilty about himself, but also like he didn't. It proves that like there's no sort of like final destination rules to life, innit? Which, so he didn't cheat death, and then he didn't spend the next like 50 years cheating death, but maybe he did, and that's where Final Destination comes from. Which I also found out maybe only last night, that Final Destination 5 is set just in the build up to the plane crash of Final Destination 1. So maybe he did spend 50 odd years trying to cheat death, and all these mad things were happening around him. So possibly there's a way to tie Dyatlov Pass, and maybe why that's so prevalent in conspiracy theory is because of this man cheating death. Went on to be, he was going to be on the plane, possibly for 9/11. He may have been then going to go and possibly jump on the subway for 7/7. Maybe he was. Maybe he was in the buildings where Ted Kaczynski was sending his packages to. Who knows? It's really hard to tell, because unfortunately there's nothing out there that says that he was in these locations, and there may be. I haven't found it, but anyway, what to me makes it really seem like Yuri could have actually been Igor, or at least maybe not actually Igor, but maybe Yuri was behind it all, is because that the team had told Yuri that they thought that they'd return to a certain point along the trail by the 12th of February, and they didn't. Now, according to hikers on the internet, this can be a normal thing when you're hiking, because, events can happen that cause delays. So, like, maybe they find a nice tree that they like the look of, or they find some magic mushrooms and like, fuck it, let's eat a bunch of these. But it was the height of winter. They're probably not going to find the shrooms because they'd be all under the snow unless they found some growing on a tree. Maybe they found some weird form of psychedelic lichen that grows on bark and they're just licking trees. Maybe they just got lost in the woods. Maybe they all died horrific deaths and they couldn't come back because they were dead, which is probably the more likely one. But usually, from what these hikers say in forums and that, they normally a few days, like 2 or 3 days after that point where they said they'll be back, is where you start to raise the alarm and be like, well, we need to send out people to look for these because, they could be hurt. Something could have happened. Like, yeah, someone could have broke their leg, but they might carry on with the journey and then, leave that person there with someone to look after them or take them back and carry on with the journey. But it had been a while, man. I think it was like they were supposed to be back there on the 12th, and by this point it's something like the 23rd, 24th. So that's like over a week, innit? Like that seems like a long time to leave someone out in a fucking Russian winter with only enough food for them to last a portion of that time. It just seems a bit weird, a bit suspect, do you know? Like it's a bit odd, innit? It seems a bit harsh. But maybe Yuri wasn't a nice person. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they kicked him away, and he was like, oh yeah, I was ill. But really, he'd been spending the whole time going, oh fucking hell, Alexander, you're getting a bit fat, mate. Are you going to be all right doing this? Like I don't think you're going to be all right with this, mate. Igor, why'd you walk like that? What's wrong with you? You walk like that fella out of Frankenstein. Like that. It could have been something like that, and. Or maybe he kept doing impressions of Igor from Frankenstein to him. I don't know. Again, hard to say. But after they'd left it for whatever reason for like over a week, before the search party was organised, they did then find a few of them were dead, and it took months as well then to find the rest of them that were dead. But the only reason they even sent out a search party wasn't even because of Yuri. So that makes it more suspicious to me, like Yuri was covering his tracks, possibly literally by causing an avalanche, who knows. But the search party was organised by the family of the people that hadn't come back, the many families of the people that hadn't come back. 8 families, potentially. Now, the search party, as I just said, did manage to find them, but unfortunately it didn't find all of them. Like, yeah, they eventually found the 9 bodies, but they were mostly incomplete. Like, they had missing tongues, missing eyes, skull fragments removed, the odd bit of face, lips, at least, and no mention at all of anyone finding or discussing the innards of these people either. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that, we didn't find the lips, and they mentioned that, but all the innards were there, so we've not mentioned that the innards were there. But I would think in a report it would be important to say, they didn't have eyes, they didn't have lips, but they had all their inner organs. Because if someone's going to, go around collecting bits of people, maybe they're going to want a heart and a liver and, some intestines and that. I'm not sure, but it seems odd to me that they wouldn't say that they were all there. It raises suspicions in my head, but I'll explain why a little later on. So, out of the 9 deaths, it's alleged that 6 of them passed away from hypothermia, and I looked it up. Hypothermia is a real thing, and it can supposedly set in on your body when your body temperature drops below 35 degrees, which in itself is terrifying because we're only 37.5 degrees, which for anyone listening overseas, that's what, like fucking 100 degrees Fahrenheit to get hypothermia. You double it in it and add 30 to get from centigrade to Fahrenheit, I think. But the temperature that night itself was only supposed to be somewhere between 0 and 10 degrees, which doesn't sound that cold for up a mountain in the Russian winter, in all honesty. So I'm kind of doubting my source there for the temperature, unless that temperature was in Fahrenheit, which again, so you take away 30 would be minus 20, double it, minus 20 times minus 20, is that minus, what's that, is that minus 40? Sorry, times 2. So I think that's minus 40, unless it's 0 again. But then temperature wouldn't make any sense, would it? Because the colder it gets in Fahrenheit, the warmer it would get in centigrade. So I'm not a mathematician, guys, nor a scientist or a historian. So I can only give you what I can find other people have found in it. And other people found a bunch of dead bodies in a creek without the faces attached to them. Anyway, but I was thinking though, for hypothermia out there, for any budding perverts out there, hypothermia is great, innit? Because, if you're up for it's a good excuse, right, for different sides of perversion, So you've got the idea that if you are a pervert yourself, in the sense that you don't want to be the voyeur, but you want to create an experience for the voyeur. And you wear your big coat and that, your big waterproof coat with nothing on underneath. Now, hypothermia is a good reason for you to possibly get away with taking that coat off in a public place. because hypothermia causes something called paradoxical undressing, which means that you whip your kit off and you show your bits to whoever's around. Not like, it doesn't make you have like fucking ping pong bats like a guy at an airport going, look at this, what do you think of this, love? I mean, that's all down to your own personal showmanship. But on the other side of perversion, if you just, if you want to see sexual activity as just like a spectator sport rather than something to actually take part in, then you've got the whole like some people like playing snooker, some people just like to watch snooker, but I imagine a lot of the people that like to watch snooker also enjoy playing snooker. So if you see sexual activity like a spectator sport as well as a participant sport, it's good because it causes, as I say, paradoxical undressing, which makes people strip off to the nutty, and they're tricked into thinking that they're getting proper hot, so they'll even fan themselves in that, and you're like, oh, they're getting a bit flush because of me. You can imagine whatever you want, which is great if you're a straight man and possibly a lesbian woman, but I've never actually asked a lesbian lady this, so I don't. I mean, to say lesbian lady sounds redundant, but still, I've never asked one if paradoxical undressing would be good for them, but I assume it is, because we're probably into the same sort of thing, because it's going to make the women's nipples go hard, innit, which is always nice. Less pleasurable though from the eye of like maybe a straight woman or possibly a gay fella, because the warmth's only an illusion and the body's still going to react to the cold, so there's going to be a fair degree of shrinkage there and balls up in the belly, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, unless you're into that, because, different strokes for different folks and all that. But, I mean, let's not dwell on that, because, like, people died, innit? But how did they die? Well, the other three are said to have died from their injuries, but I don't understand how they can tell that. I mean, yeah, they were frozen in a creek, potentially, allegedly, and that would preserve them to some extent. But what doesn't sit well with me is how the creek was flowing if everything else was covered in snow and frozen. But I looked into it a little bit, and again, I'm not a chemist, but I looked into it a little bit, or a geologist, or, a geographer, or if that's a thing, or a cartographer, but still, I did look into it, and there is large fucking deposits of salt in those mountains, potassium salts specifically, which seem to be used and have applications for melting snow and ice, which makes you wonder, how is there any snow there in the first place? How is there any snow or ice there in the first place? But maybe it was started running through the river because of the, there's alleged avalanches that were happening, so maybe that caused a landslide, and then it was in the river, melting through the water, dispersing through the water. Fucking osmosis, there's a scientific term for you to make you think I know what I'm on about. And the salt passes down the stream, and preserving people. But does salt water really preserve a person? So maybe it's got nothing to do with the potassium salts. Now, I did say alleged avalanche there because there's supposed to be no historical record at all of an avalanche ever happening those weeks in that particular area. And according to most experts, it seems the damage to the tent wouldn't have been from an avalanche, because it was supposedly the side of the tent that was damaged that was facing the uphill slant of the mountain. That's the side of the tent that was ripped, which was also like ripped from the inside out, so that doesn't really add up to an avalanche, really, especially facing the avalanche. But then how do you tell if it's been left there for weeks and there's been winds and stuff like that and animals? How do you know that tent's been ripped from the inside out? There's a lot of what ifs and maybes, which is what makes it such a good little topic in it to really like sink our teeth into. Now, I don't know how that would, like the rips. I don't know how the rips would factor in with the hypothermia either. Like, yeah, like unless hypothermia itself can make you go like mental and attack your own tent, which must be a possibility. But there's also then you got the idea, like I brought up before, this could have been a fucking psychedelic lichens that they could have been licking off the trees. There's also this weird wind that some people believe, which I think I'll go on about a bit later, but there is a weird wind that can occur that can, mess with your brain. And there is more evidence, though. I'll stick with the avalanche. There's more evidence to show that this probably wasn't an avalanche, and that's the spacing between footprints that were left in the snow. Because according to some internet sleuths and people at the scene, the spacing of the footprints were too close together. Like how when you're walking down the street and you see someone and you're like, I don't like the look of them because like their eyes are almost touching. Well, according to these people, like researchers and scientists and possibly police officers and maybe woodsmen, if that's what they're called, the people that look after the hills, they looked at these footsteps and I don't like this, they're too close together. They weren't running. Which means, like, I reckon, in my assumptions, if there's an avalanche, the very least you can try and do is run away. But then you've got the other parts of an avalanche, though, where people say if you do get stuck in an avalanche, like, you don't know which way's up and which way's down. But I reckon if you can fucking, like, wiggle around a little bit and make a little bit of air, around your face, maybe you can't see, but you could put your hands, like, above and below your face and then spit. If the water touches the hand that's above your face, then you're upside down, aren't you? Surely you can use gravity like that, but again, not too sure, not a scientist. But you would think, just using common sense, that if there was going to be footprints in the snow during an avalanche, which, again, suspicious because an avalanche would probably fill in the footprints, I would imagine, but the footprints would be going away from the hill, maybe towards the trees, so they could, well, according to the internet sleuths, towards the trees for safety. But in my opinion, if there's a big fucking avalanche, no real point in running. And no point running towards the trees, because that's just an extra thing to be fucking ripped out of the ground and fucked towards you by the oncoming wave of fucking snow. So there's no real way to win there, but I think the footprints are important because it must prove there wasn't an avalanche or there was somebody else there on the scene well long after the deaths. Because are you trying to tell us that these snowy mountain hills didn't have snow in the snowy mountains for a week and a half? It doesn't make sense, does it? Because if there was snow, then it'd fill the footprints. The footprints aren't gonna stay there imprinted in the snow. It's gonna, surely it would fucking fill in the gaps, or the avalanche would fill in the gap because it's fucking snow coming down, destroying trees but leaving footprints. Kind of like how with like 9/11, where the passport was just at the bottom unburnt and all that of the person who happened to fucking take the plane over. If I've remembered that correctly. It's just sits a little bit weird with a few people. Now, these footprints are yet again another source of contention, because at some points there's some footprints where there's only one shoe. Now, that, personally, I always bring a little bit of Catholicism into this, don't I? And that reminds me of those poems that they tell kids at school about, I was looking at the footprints in the sand, and where were you when I was at my hardest? When I was fucking 23 and I was a drunk, and I was fighting homeless people in car parks for the pound coin that I'd found on the floor, and a bag full of cig dimps that I was gonna go home and feed to my nan's cat for a laugh. But I wanted them, but you wanted them. And where were you, God? Where were you? Like, where were you? And he's like, well, it was at that point where I carried you, my son. They're them poems. Now, that kind of reminds me of this because, there's one footprint. But what if... Now, this is going to get a little bit hard to follow, but... Now, let's say that one shoe print is actually... It was actually God. Let's take into a fact maybe it was God, because, God's supposed to be everywhere and with us all the time. And what if... When they say we were built in God's image, what if we once were built in God's image and it was a snowy place or it was a sandy place? A lot of people believe it could have been a sandy place, but it could have also been a snowy place, which is a very similar terrain. Now, I would argue humans aren't specifically built for climbing desert sands or walking through snowy mountains. But what if originally, when we were made by God, we were made with like caterpillar tracks, but we still had feet on us, but they were on the caterpillar tracks and they were like a couple meters apart, or like a few feet apart. Pardon the extra use of the word foot there to confuse things, but let's say, there's 18 inches or so between each foot on these naturally occurring caterpillar tracks on a human, and that's maybe where our arms and legs have then like detached from our bodies, and that's why we've now got a rib cage, because them ribs used to connect our arms to our legs, and we'd spin round in like circles with these extra feet that would grip into the snow or the sand in order to drag us along. And then God was like, right, nah, this is mental. I'm going to make evolution now, because I can already see in the future, and there's going to be this guy that's going to invent a telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and how are you going to be able to pick up the phone? So I need to evolution. We'll have evolution. We'll make evolution a thing, and I can already see it's going to cause problems. But we're going to need it because it's just not going to work. This isn't something that could work forever. Once you find out about tarmac, you don't really need these caterpillar tracks anymore. So you need to be able to change and adapt, and maybe that's where that came from. But unfortunately, though, like realistically, like God was nowhere to be seen at this time because all these people died fucking horrific deaths under suspicious circumstances, up a mountain, miles away from anyone that ever loved them, in the freezing cold. It's not very godly, although it kind of is very godly as well, though, if you believe some of the stories of the Old Testament. So, he swings and roundabouts. Maybe is that the right phrase? Something else though that makes the death seem a little more like hypothermia more than an avalanche is the footprints indicating that they only walked away rather than being further apart, like someone sprinting away from an avalanche, as if that would help. And I guess the very fact that there were, as I said, still footprints there, that's got to mean that the avalanche couldn't have happened, or if it did, it only reached a certain point and they must have looked at it, it happened, and under shock they just went, fucking hell. Fancy that. It just stops dead at the feet and they just walk away or walk up it. But you'd have to be mental to walk up a fresh avalanche, I would have thought. Now, we do know that there's about 23 days where the 9 mountaineers were unaccounted for. So, did they just get lost? It seems unlikely, but I mean, could they have gotten lost? They had no access to the food, the compasses, the maps, the cameras, but they did find the cameras, and I think they found a compass on one of the dead guys and a camera on one of the dead guys, which I don't think they ever released the photos from. I don't think they released the photos from any of them, but they found the diaries, cameras, satchels and stuff like that spread around the mountain from them, supposedly. But if they had no access to the food or the tent or anything like that, maybe they resorted to eating each other, which... it wouldn't be the first time a bunch of people up a cold hill have eaten each other. Like last week in Truth Seeking, I spoke a little bit at the start about the Donner Party and how they resorted to eating one another. But what's weird though there is that the area now where Dyatlov Pass is supposed to be a good ski resort, a good skiing place. It's got good, good snow, nice snow for skiing and snowboarding and that, supposedly. And as I said, I've not actually looked at a map of this, which is an oversight on my part. But now, what's also weird is where the Donner Party died. There's a ski resort, supposedly a Disney ski resort, been built there. So what if, where you get a good ski resort where there's a lot of dead people kind of thing, what if that has to have a high concentration of that for some form of weird ritualistic or magical energy to be there? And then maybe what if that's how they then name the slopes after colours, for the gradient of danger? So you could have, like your red slope is your easy slope, that's, and then your yellow slope is your slightly harder slope. Maybe 2 people died in that region on that distance there, in that trek. Then you've got maybe green slopes could be a little bit harder, but still reasonably okay for the amateur. Brown slopes, 4 people have died on the brown slope on that trek, that mountaineering trek there. And then it gets a bit harder then with the blue slopes, where it's getting a bit dangerous now. Like five, there's the ghosts of 5 dead explorers along that there mountain trek there. And then you got the pink one, which is one off from the hardest, which maybe a multiple of 6 have died in that area, in that vicinity there, before the track was made, and it's a way to dedicate it to them, and then obviously the hardest one would be the black slope, which is, maybe 7 people died there. So then again, that kind of falls apart with the whole, like, the idea of that 8 people actually died in this area. But what if it was 1 person died here, 3 people died there, and fucking 4 people died over there, and then they thought, well, we've got gaps here and we could build on this, and or maybe they just had, 1 person died on this area on the red slope, and then 7 people died on the black slope. But then you could have, like a red, or you could sort of, it gives you a limit as well on your ski resort, doesn't it? Really, a good limitation on your how many slopes you could have, because you could have like one after the other. You could have like a red slope, a black slope, 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 and so on until you've accounted for all 147 deaths on your skiing course. But then I mean, I've gotten a little bit. But these people though that were eating themselves, like I've got no basis for truth there, for source of information about the different ski resorts and how they do name the increasing dangerous slopes. But what the people that did eat each other at the Donner Party, right? They did it as a means of trying to keep alive and keeping warm. So what if these people did it as a means of trying to keep alive and keeping warm? And then they kind of, as they sort of were like, oh fuck, what have we done? Like fucking, like Alexander's there looking at Igor, going, oh fucking hell, he's got a good eye on him. I might have a bit of that, because if you are trapped out at sea, one of the best ways of hydrating yourself is to catch fish and eat their eyeballs. Supposedly, I've read that somewhere. That might keep someone alive. That's supposed to keep you alive because it keeps you hydrated. Because you can't drink the salt water because you'll die quicker. But apparently, the fish's eyeballs are a really good source of actual water. Maybe human eyeballs are as well, because maybe the snow was a bit salty from all the potassium in there. Maybe there's radioactive materials in the ground there as well. I think I read something about there being the potential for that around the area. But then when they vet these bodies, maybe they dump them in the river, in the creek, in a weird panic, hoping to wash away any evidence and to wash away the sins of what they've done. The fucking hell, I met these people who were my new friends, and fucking hell, I was hanging out the back of her last night, and now I'm tucking into her face. Do you know what I mean? Like it's gonna cause a dirty feeling amongst yourself in a way. As I said before, like the facial features of many of them had been removed. So what if that was though some form of shape-shifting alien looking to make a new outfit in order to infiltrate the local military base? Because there was a very local military base to where this happened, and I know it might seem far-fetched, and there were reported sightings of orange glowing lights in the sky as well. Maybe these were spacecraft coming down. Maybe this is what the aliens had actually planned for Roswell 12 years prior, but either the US managed to shoot them down because they'd come down in an open desert, or maybe they just happened to crash into the ground in America, whereas they'd had 12 years here to prepare for the next attempt and thought, right, we've got enough fuel to reach this height above sea level, so we need a mountain, and if we need it to be kind of discreet where people aren't going to really see us, we've already been in touch with the military guys there. They know we're coming. These ones now, they know we're coming. We've learned from our mistakes. We don't want to just turn up there because then they rip us apart and he's never coming home, and we'll get into that in a minute. But you know what I mean? Like maybe they prepared for it. But what if there's more to it than that? What if the aliens at Roswell were actually the tall whites that we've been learning about in past episodes? So, to give you a bit of maths behind it, 12 years on Earth is apparently the same as 19 and a half years on Venus, the home of the Hollow Venusians who live inside the Hollow Venus, just like possibly the Sasquatches live inside our Hollow Earth, maybe. Possibly with Nazis, maybe with not Nazis, maybe with reptilians. But we'll focus on the Hollow Venusians just for a minute, because let's make it seem a bit realistic. Now the Venusian explorers, when they came to and caused the crash at Roswell, they maybe just been out performing a simple task, scouting Earth, delivering a message, and then they never came home. What if one of the pilots of the so-called weather balloon that came down in the desert, or actual Venusian spacecraft, depending on who you believe or want to listen to, what if one of the pilots had a baby at home, and let's say that baby was about 1 year old during the time of the crash, meaning that this other parent then had to raise that baby on their own, making the baby grow up to be spiteful, or at the very least inquisitive towards the Earthlings. On Earth, right, the average age of adulthood is about 18, innit? So let's imagine it is on Venus as well, because why not? It makes it easier. Except on Venus, though, it takes 19 and a half years to cover the same amount of time as it does on Earth for the 12-year gap in between the two crashes. So let's say it took the newly adult Venusian year and a half to maybe a Venusian year to a Venusian year and a half to get to Earth, which is only about a year in Earth time, like give or take a couple lunar cycles either way. But I mean, and that's a lot of time that they can be winding themselves up on the flight on the way here, because their mums told them, oh, your dad's a piece of shit, he said he was going to work but he never came home, and he's off out fucking these Earthlings, and because apparently they put out, and he's saying, oh, I don't do these these things that the Earthlings do, because he was sending a text on the way there winding her up, get her jealous so that when he gets back she'll really go to town on him. That was his hope anyway, but it backfired because he never came home. He died in a crash, or burnt up in the atmosphere, or got ripped apart at Area 51. Who knows? But either way, maybe when they reach the Earth, this Venusian teenager now at this point, let's say a 19-year-old Venusian, hollow Venusian, and they scanned the Earth for life signs and found a bunch of people alone near the military base where they'd planned to land. They realised, that'll be a good group to harvest. I'll harvest them so I can make myself some skin suits. Maybe they used the body parts to initiate cloning or to full-on graft some skin suits to themselves. And I mean, this isn't hard to imagine because some of you may have already be aware of that. Americans had met Val Valiant Thor in 1957, so maybe the kid actually managed to get to Earth on Val's ship, and then had a job where he had to keep in space to keep Dog or Whistle Dixie, whatever you call it, in case those pesky Martians showed up, or the reptilians made a return, possibly from deeper space, or at least that's what Val thought he was going to be doing. Whereas, because we know he couldn't have taken Val's ship and used that, because Val's main ship, at least, because that was located on I can't remember what lake, but it was located on a lake somewhere in America. But what if it wasn't actually aliens though? What else could it have been that caused these people to die? Well, have you ever heard of the Menk? They're that area of the world's answer to the Sasquatch, a Bigfoot or Yeti-like species that's depicted as an angry, ferocious-looking creature, as compared to like the weed-smoking version of Sassy and his mates in the Big Les Show, or Harry and the Hendersons, or the Yetis in that Littlefoot film that I think was it Common? Did Common voice him or did a song for it? Either way, but these things, the Menk, they're vicious. So it could be a single Menk that decimated the entire group. But what evidence of that is there? Well, I've always imagined the Sasquatches to be strong, because of their size, and at least one of the bodies was described as suffering from an impact that would normally be seen by like forensics or the pathologist or whatever, when someone gets fucking cracked by a speeding car, and that's, to me, that sounds a lot like a slap from a Yeti to me. And it would also explain the lack of facial features in the victims, because as humans, when we kill someone, we take teeth. But the possibly interdimensional Sasquatch species, they might not have a use for teeth, because if the drawings of the Menk or anything to go off, I reckon the mates would just fucking laugh at them when they tried showing off a human molar. Like, that doesn't look very dangerous. What did you kill? A small cow? But an eyeball or lips, that's not something to be shrugged off at, because that's fucking mental to grab. Especially like if the fucking Menk took it and collected a random collection of these facial features from all these strangers and attached them to some form of piece of tree bark to make some form of avant-garde offering to their leader, or to simply put on the wall of their burrow to the hollow earth, back to Agartha, as like a warning sign or something, like keep out of my swamp sort of thing. Now, the Sasquatch creatures are also, in conspiracy law cryptid zoology, they're always associated, not always, but a lot of the time, they're associated with lights in the sky too. So what if those lights are just our way of witnessing interdimensional travel? Maybe that's how they burst through this plane of existence. But what if the Menk and the aliens of the visiting UFOs are actually at war with one another, and have always been at war with one another using Earth and our plane of existence on Earth? Maybe they're at war over us as humans as a resource, or we're seen maybe as little more than like fucking goats and pigeons in a war zone, like how I imagine goats and pigeons are seen in war zones on Earth. It's just like, it's just a fucking pigeon in the way. Don't worry about blowing the pigeon up. They think, don't worry about blowing the people up. I'm more bothered about, we need to kill that Yeti. Except they're aliens saying it, so it'd probably be more like like that, and the Yetis would probably speak with a bit of a gruff kind of thing like that, and make the throats hurt as they're talking for like an hour at once, and then the aliens are like, we're bored of this Yeti just keeps fucking talking nonsense, fucking kill him with the space laser, and then they fire the space laser, but actually it kills like fucking 9 randomers on a mountain. It's hard to know for sure, but like, if we are seen as little more than the wildlife, the local fauna to these conflicting tribes of cryptozoological creatures, in a way, that could make the Menk our guardians, innit? Like, the Menk have got stories, not like that they sit around fires and tell, but there are stories of the Menk that reach up to like 1,000 miles away from the location of the now known Dyatlov Pass incident, and now that seems like quite a long way away, especially through the snow, but if we bear in mind that the very people that died managed to also walk a mile in possibly a night of very heavy snow, if it was an avalanche, with their short human legs and maybe a lack of food, then 1,000 miles for the long-legged cryptid is nothing, especially when there's no time frame to attach to it. And imagine walking a mile in the snow, mate. That'd be like walking a mile, except through really fucking heavy polystyrene. But why would these creatures even bother to traverse like a fucking 1,000 miles, a kilometre? Let's call it a kilometre over mountains like that. Well, it wouldn't be a kilometre, would it? Because that's not 1,000. A kilo mile. I know that's obviously mixing up me fucking things. But there must be a word for 1,000 miles. Like let's why would a mink travel 1,000 miles over mountains though? Like it seems bizarre, doesn't it? Well, but if we take into account a possibly very close relative of both ours and the mink, known as the mountain gorilla, a species that is known for its ability to camouflage and also for travelling miles throughout its life and never having a specific territory of their own, that makes them just like the mink. A couple other things that tie them together as well, but something else that helps confirm the existence of the mink is actually a Russian scientist who's proven that a man-like mammal is living in that area, at least according to a couple of the tabloid papers I found on the internet. And I think the scientist himself was from the Hydrometeorological Institute, but I don't know for certain if those two notes are actually connected because I haven't wrote a sentence with it. I've just wrote Russian scientist and then an arrow to it saying Hydrometeorological Institute. But if they are, then that proves that the messages that we were getting from the last Airbender film about, 10 weeks ago, could be true, that there is actually a species of creature living inside the moon and the Earth's waterways that are both possibly interdimensional. The mink could be interdimensional, and they're studied by a place that sounds like it's associated with both water and space. And I think it's fucking mad, mate, how all these things link together, innit? Like, I don't know what you're reckoning, innit? But I think it's fucking weird, mate. Now, this scientist figured out that these creatures existed. I think it was this guy. He found there was a piece of hair or some chunk of hair in a cave known as Azaskaya Cave, Azasskaya cave. Most mink, though, as I said, are said to be found like 1,000 miles away in Mount Shoriya, Shoriya. But they could cut through the mountains, I guess, or, travel underneath them like the Bigfoot of North America is said to do through the tunnels of Hollow Earth, if the mink do have access to the Hollow Earth. We can also use the mountain gorillas to tie together the idea of an interdimensional war being fought on our plane of existence by the Sasquatch of the mountains and reptilian aliens. So maybe not the Venusians versus the mink, but maybe the reptilians versus the mink. Just like in how America and like Russia tend to now fight each other, but never really fight each other in either's land. It's always in someone else's country, like that kind of thing. So instead of fighting it in space, because we know the mink can't get to space, and the reptilians, they don't want the reptilians coming into Hollow Earth, so they fight it on a sort of a neutral ground kind of thing. Like how when you go to like Games Workshop and that, the fat lads in there and the greasy girls that go there and that. They don't settle their differences outside in the car park like reprobates. They set up the table and they're like, right, I know I owe you a $5, but if you can beat me here with my orcs, then it's yours. But it's got nothing to really do with the orcs. It's just a means of settling the problem. If that helps build the analogy, But what does help build this analogy of the reptilians and the mink is because mountain gorillas are apparently scared of certain types of reptile. And maybe, could that be an indication of the transference of hereditary fears? In the same way that, if like a mum's scared of the spiders, then there's a good chance that a daughter's probably going to be scared of spiders too, because fears are passed on genetically and hereditary, like a disease. But maybe the gorillas, though, aren't at all related to the mink that decimated the Dyatlov Pass explorers. Maybe the mink are more closely related to the giants that we learnt about ages ago. Maybe they're just giants and in camouflage, because if you think about it, they're usually said to be hairy and walk weird, but some human hunters, as in, humans that hunt, like Craven from Marvel, although Craven does kill people as well, not a great example, but what's that PlayStation game? Caleb something or other, the hunting game. Either way, like humans that hunt things, not humans that hunt other hunters. But not as in like, like a shape-shifting reptilian alien that would hunt humans or predator. Anyway, the human hunters, they'll tend to wear like fucking ghillie suits and that in it, and maybe even a pair of stilts or something if they fancy a challenge, to balance the gun or the bow and arrow, or maybe maybe they do it to see over the taller grasses when you say it out loud and actually think about it. But these furs that we see on these creatures could be from the mammoths of Agartha that Richard E. Byrd saw in Antarctica, maybe even the furs of the long since extinct species of bear known as cave bears that was known to reside in this area of the world where this took place. Or possibly from the giant sloth, because maybe they can travel through the earth, so why not be able to travel through time? If they can travel, one, through solid matter, interdimensionally, why can't they travel through time, go back, kill a giant sloth on the other side of the world, and come back to it? But we'll stay away from time travel, because, I don't want to start saying the Menk are like Al Bailik and confusing everything and making this episode, in the world of nonsense and mystical shite. I want to try and keep with what we know. So maybe these victims of the interdimensional warfares, the collateral damage, if you like, were the proto-hippies trying to stop the two sides from killing each other by, throwing themselves into harm's way to no avail. And it's hard to know who's winning this war because, according to Russia's leading researcher, apparently called Igor Burtsev, there are at least 30 Menk in existence to this day. But I've got no idea if that's hardly any Menk or if that's a lot of Menk, because I've got no frame of reference for it, unfortunately. Like, if someone said to me I found 30 mountain gorillas, I'd be like, is that good? If they said I found 30 mountain gorillas, in the fucking bottom floor of the bottom floor of Primark or something, I'd be like, fucking hell, what are they doing there? That's a lot of gorillas to be there. But if they said I found 30 mountain gorillas in a rainforest, I'd be like, that's a shame, innit? You'd think there'd be more. But with Menk, I haven't got a clue, mate. And maybe the Menk and the aliens have laws in place or treaties or something in place that stop the needless killing of humans by the aliens and the Menk, just like how we protect the whales around Antarctica and around the world with the International Commercial Whaling Ban of 1986. But maybe the Menk or the aliens, maybe they managed to get around not commercially hunting the humans, and instead they hunt them for scientific purposes by abducting them for probing, sexual deviancy, and scientific analysis. Maybe this is why there are often Sasquatches seen near abduction sites, because maybe they're trying to keep people away from the dangerous aliens so that they don't get stuff shoved up the bums when they don't want it. And maybe that's why they kept away from the area, and instead of searching for the people. This is the search parties now and that, when they hadn't returned by the 12th, because they knew this was going on. So maybe they thought, we'll stay away because we don't want to encroach on that war there. We'll wait till the fights died down and then we'll go off and gather our dead, like they did in World War One when the shooting stopped. They'd be like, right, give us 10 minutes to drag the dead guys back. And then maybe that's what they were trying to do. And the reptilians and the Menk were just looking at each other going, sig break, fag break. And they're like, yeah, all right. And they put down the guns and they go and stand in, literally in no man's land, because no man can go there, and because otherwise they'll get killed, by a fucking reptilian laser beam. This kind of thing, I mean, I don't know if this is the reason or not the reason. Like, I mean, prove to me it's not me. Let's have a song anyway. This is Drugs in a Suitcase by Chris Webby. So that was my overriding theory of what happened at the Dyatlov Pass, but others put the deaths down to a multitude of reasons, from military tests of new weaponry, both like microwave weaponry and radioactive weaponry, causing people to go mental. But as I said at the start, there is apparently a naturally occurring phenomena that will cause people to actually go mental for a little bit, and it will make them go crazy, and it's a wind whistling through the mountains. So you've got like the hills have eyes and the walls have ears, and now mountains have like little whispering, puckering lips, like a cat's arsehole or a dog's arsehole, and it needs very specific circumstances to happen. But some experts feel like it could happen within a few mile radius of where these very deaths occurred back in the 1950s. Some people at the time actually stated that the death was caused by a compelling natural force, which to me and many others I'm sure means Menk, but to these guys it now means these whistling winds, or actually catabonic winds. It's at the very least. And now catabonic winds have also killed 8 other... Well, I can't remember if it's... Catabonic winds is like a really fucking strong wind that seems to come out of nowhere. But I can't remember the name of these, like these whispering winds. I say whispering winds because obviously, like, I imagine it gets, in your head and you're like, run down the hill, Polar naked, go on, do it, slap Alexander in the face, rip his eye out, eat his eye for moisture, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. That's what I'm imagining these winds sound like, rather than just hearing like that, in your ears. I imagine it's like a voice in your head. Either way, some form of mad wind killed 8 people in a mountain range in Sweden too in I think it was 1978, which again is almost 20 years after Dyatlov Pass, which itself was nearly 20 years after Roswell. So maybe there is an alien connection or a naturally occurring destructive power that didn't have a name until the term catabonic winds was coined. Maybe it's got something to do with solar activity. I don't know. Some of the people, though, that died in the Ural Mountains back in the 50s, they were found wearing the clothes of some of the other dead people. Many have assigned this, to the cold weather and hypothermia, but there is one theory out there that claims that the local military were experimenting with something called parachute mines, a form of explosive that seems to explode before it hits the ground, so it's basically just a bad bomb, I guess. But these people could have just timed the journey really poorly and got caught in a flurry of shrapnel and fireballs. The explosions would explain all the orange balls seen by the police officer at the time called Lev Ivanov on the night of the alleged deaths, but he wasn't actually able to tell anyone about it until 1990 because back in the 50s he was told to dismiss the claims by high-up military officials. But there were hikers about 31 miles away who also claimed to have witnessed orange balls glowing in the sky on what they think was the night of the deaths. So if these parachute mines were experimental, maybe some of them exploded in the air whilst they were too close to one another because they might have had been testing out sort of like a proximity device on them which made them blow up, and maybe a chain reaction of big explosions that could be seen for miles around, making fucking bits of metal fly down and take out lips and eyes and chunks of head and ripping people's hair off like a pervert in a fucking swimming bath changing room, But I don't know much about explosives, but if they did wake up to these sounds and found pieces of metal inside the tent, or, maybe the tent did just exploding just outside the tent, maybe they'd picked up these pieces of metal, and that would explain the burn marks found on the dead people's hands, only on a few of their hands, because maybe they picked it up and went, fucking hell. Another person went, what? And they caught it and went, oh, shit. And everyone else was like, right, don't touch the metal, it's really hot. Do you know what I mean? Like, that could have happened. It would also explain why the tent was ripped. Maybe they took a piece of it while it burns and cut the tent and got out or it came through the tent, ripped all, and they were like, fucking hell, what the fuck was that? Get out the other side, because maybe they thought possibly that they were being shot at or something. They wouldn't know what was going on, would they? It still doesn't explain the slow walk away though, because I would have thought if there's a load of explosions, you're probably going to panic and run. But it would explain the lack of shoes and clothes for some of them, because if they panicked at that point and just ran, then maybe that's why they slowed down pretty quick, because they got cold. So maybe that's why there wasn't many footsteps indicating that they ran. Now these parachute mines could also explain why the organs weren't spoken of, like I said at the start, and why body features were missing. I'd initially thought that one of them had possibly, maybe eaten the brain of another one, and that's why the skull fragments had been removed from the head, because, a brain's got to be pretty well insulated anyway for it to survive, and maybe that means it would stay warmer and actually stay liquidy and soft and able to eat when the body starts to freeze, rather than other parts of the body. But it's hard to know that for sure. But if these experimental fragments had ended up in the lips, eyes and inner organs of these people, then maybe whoever was in charge of this experiment just removed the fragments of tissue with the fragments of minds inside to test what effects they had on flesh, and maybe just to cover up the experimental technology in case it impacted on the Cold War that was going on at the time. But then again, what if Cold War is simply called that because it was a war fought between the Menk and the reptilian aliens who were fighting atop snowy mountains?
If you're enjoying this, mate, don't forget to give us a review and not on Apple if you can. Otherwise, send it to... If everybody who's listening sent it to a couple of mates, right? I might be able to get towards getting paid to make these for adverts and that. Otherwise, no worries if not. There's people giving money on the Patreon, which is a link to that in the below as well. The money from that goes towards hosting this and hosting Truth Seeking. Give Truth Seeking a listen as well. There'll be a link to that below possibly. Otherwise, just have a look in my Linktree link.
More recently, right, people have come out now. This is what I mean. The new developments. Unfortunately, the new developments. There's not a great deal to it. I thought there'd be a lot more on it, but they've come out and said that on the people that died on Death Mountain, which is also known by the locals as don't be messing mountain. They reckon it's because of something called a slab avalanche, which is called. Well, they claim, experts now claim that this avalanche was caused by the hikers digging themselves a shelter in the snow and some high winds that made the snow drop on them and killed them. So in my own words, summarising what these modern scientists are saying about these poor deceased dead individuals, it was their own fault, which feels like a really good way to stop people from blaming Russian scientists or the local military, or from even considering a war amongst aliens between the Menk. It seems like a really good way to cover it up, and it seems a bit harsh because in today's climate it seems wrong to be going, oh, they're the victim of something that happened there, but it's their fault, or they died up a mountain, but they were asking for it, if you're gonna go up that mountain with a skirt that shows the bottom of your arse cheeks off, you're asking to die of hypothermia up there. Do you know what I mean? It's fucking mad. Or if if you will take your shovel into the bottom of that mountain and dig a cave where there shouldn't be a cave with all that snow above it, gravity will have you. Gravity's going to have it, and then you're going to come back at us. You're going to haunt us and tell me that gravity did this, gravity did that. It just seems fucking mad, mate. So it makes it seem like there is something being covered up here, especially when you learn that, like I said, supposedly Russians cover this up and you can't really find much about it on Russian internet, but I've never been on Russian internet. I mean, like, I've been on, like, a fucking Russian news thing, apparently, which I've probably spoken about before, which was really weird. They didn't tell me that was going out live. And I was just swearing my head off and fucking telling jokes for the sake of it, just taking the piss, trying to make the guy laugh. And, but regardless, that's nothing to do with any of this. So there's no real conclusion this week, though, from this. Hopefully it was still interesting. Now, later on tonight, we've got a bit of HDR. I don't think there's going to be any Jimmy tonight, unless he's sent in a show already. So I'm guessing Gary will be taking over, doing his bits tonight. Now, if you enjoy the Here's Hows, go and find them on Spotify, mate. Go and find them on Spotify, Apple and all that. Deezer, Apple, wherever you listen to stuff, YouTube even. And spread them around for me, because it'd be nice to know that people are finding them. And, then hopefully people might find Threshold through that as well. It's a nice little 5-minute thing you can share or relive, your favourite fucking sociopathic life advice from, hopefully, your favourite taxidermist. Now, also, speaking of taxidermy, at this very minute, I've got some rat's arms on springs that I call my portable high-five machine, so if anyone's interested in them, go to worldaroundyou.com, and I am thinking to myself that I've had a little bit of an oversight there, so I'm hoping by the time that this goes out, for in the live chat I can show you a thing of it, but I'm going to try and make something that I'm going to call a ratapult, which is, as the name suggests, a catapult, but instead of like how your average catapult is made from bits of leftover feline, this one's going to be made over from bits of leftover rodent that I've got, and I'm going to try and make it so that you can fucking fling something, maybe at a target or something, I'm not too sure, but that's something, and I haven't really got anything else to say. If I was to say any more, I'd purely be padding the show for the next, 30 seconds. So I can try, but, I mean, what's the point? So I'll see you in a bit, guys. So thanks for listening. Stick around for some other bits. See you in a bit.
Thanks for listening, man. If you enjoyed the show, give it a share online, share it in your Instagram stories from Spotify. Send it to a mate. Talk about it on social media. Tweet me, mate. Tweet me. When I get 2,000 followers on Twitter, I'll be doing a taxidermy giveaway. So, that's something for you, innit? That's a little something. @WorldAroundYou, same as the name of the show. I'll see you in a bit, mate.